movements within history. So in this, generally what they ask is, why did they start? What was their impact? These are the two basic questions they asked from the tribal and peasantry movements. I have shared with you three basic notes. These are IGNOU material on tribal, peasant, and worker movements in India. So in these notes, the basic maturity of language is the reason why I shared with you. Okay. प्रोटेस्ट क्या होता है, रेजिस्टेंस क्या होता है, मूवमेंट क्या होता है, पहले तो इस चीज में क्लैरिटी करने की कोशिश की है. ठीक है. Then let's go through that, and then we'll go through the question answers that I have just sent you. Okay. So here it is. So protest is a method of showing dissent or objection by an individual or a group of people to the action of a state or the authority. So that is a protest. Then through protest, the powerless show its resistance to the dominant value and authority. But movement, on the contrary, requires a longer period of sustained collective action. So when we say freedom struggle movement, so that means, or Kisan Andolan, a movement को आंदोलन बोलते हैं. So that is a sustained collective action. It requires proper coordination, leadership, organization on a collective basis. Movements are often oriented towards realizing a bigger social or political goal through a change in state policy. So that's a movement. So what was the nature of tribal protests or tribal movements or tribal uprisings in India? कभी ऐसा क्वेश्चन अगर आ जाए तो नेचर ऑफ ट्राइबल रिवोल्ट्स, उसके ऊपर ये वाला बेसिक रिक्वायरमेंट है. Now, movements in the context of Indian tribes have a long history. Before the advent of the Britishers, the Adivasis of India had a different nomenclature such as Jana, because Janapada, तो उसके अंदर Jana, they were the Adivasis. They lived a self-sustained, self-ruled life in mostly the forest and hill regions of India. The forest lands and other resources in the tribal habitat were never claimed by an outsider before the advent of the British rule. कोई जाता ही नहीं था फॉरेस्ट के अंदर, सबका काम सिटी बेस्ड होता था या विलेज बेस्ड होता था, और यहाँ सिर्फ आदिवासी रहते थे. This is hardly there is hardly any recorded evidence of the conflicts between Adivasis with the outsiders before the British rule. The British administration introduced the new forest policy, the Indian Forest Act of 1867, by which entire forest land in India became the property of the state. तो एक तरह से acquire करना था उनको तो जितना हो सकता है. The state became conservator of Indian forest by this act. Thus, during the British rule, the remote hilly and the forest areas in India where the Adivasis lived became open to outsiders. Britishers had their commercial interests in Adivasi habitat due to the abundance of natural resources in the area. Once these inaccessible areas were made accessible, there was influx of the Dikus, that is outsiders in the area. तो ट्राइबल्स, हम जैसे सपोज पंजाब से हैं और हम किसी ट्राइबल जोन में जाएंगे तो हमारा नाम डिक्कू पड़ेगा उधर. Eventually, the British administration named various types of Adivasis into a single term, tribe, for administrative purposes. इसीलिए आजकल हम बोलते हैं scheduled tribe. So as soon as the area where these tribes lived became open to non-tribals, the Adivasis became increasingly vulnerable to exploitation. The tribal land, timber, and other resources were targeted by the Britishers as well as non-traders or non-tribal traders. Gradually, the number of exploiters in tribal areas increased, which included money lenders, middlemen, contractors, liquor Am I audible, visible properly?
Yes, sir, you're audible now.
Okay. Where did I lose you? हेलो हेलो विनायक कहाँ पे शूट किया था?
So next 144 वाले page पे tribal you were saying something about yes the second
Okay.
paragraph.
Second
Yes.
paragraph. So basically, movements in Indian tribes, they have been having a long history. Essentially, after the coming up of the Indian Forest Act, ये
So
हो गया
Diku
So we had done this till Deepu's तक हो.
यहाँ पे. Okay, fine. So basically, why were the Britishers there, or why were the non-tribal communities there? So they were there to exploit the tribal land, timber, other resources. And who were the basic people who were the exploiters? So they are money lenders, middlemen, contractors, liquor vendors, and zamindars. The tribal communities resisted such exploitation, obviously, and the means of resistance were different from time to time. Okay, so characteristics. Now, if we examine the nature of tribal movements, अब ये direct question है एक UPSC level का. What was the nature of tribal movements in India? What was the nature of tribal movements in India? जब हम स्पेक्ट्रम पढ़ते हैं ना उसमें ये सारी चीजें नहीं आती इस तरह से. उधर जनरल ट्राइबल मूवमेंट्स का एक कलेक्शन दिया है फ्रॉम द प्रीलिम्स पर्सपेक्टिव. Okay, so we can observe that they are mostly spontaneous outbursts of long pent up anger against the exploiters such as the government, officials, landlords, money lenders, and traders. So what was the nature? Spontaneous outburst. Okay. Most of these movements are marked by exemplary unity among the people against the oppressor. Ethnic identity and the sense of indigeneity contributed to the social solidarity, that they are all one tribe or tribals against the organization. Another characteristic feature of the tribal movement is that most of them aim to solve only immediate grievances. For example, deforestation, kind of exploitation by money lenders. ये सब जो इमीडिएट है बस उसी को ध्यान रखना है. ऑप्रेसर को उतना ही भगाना है यहाँ से जितना की जरूरत है. Only a few of them looked beyond immediate needs to think of any long-term goal or issue. दूसरा इनका अगर नेचर में देखें तो पहला एस्पेक्ट तो हमें यहाँ मिलता है कि they were spontaneous in nature. ठीक है, spontaneous outbursts. दूसरा, focus on immediate goal or immediate problem. Immediate issue. Fine. Almost all tribal movements took violent turn and subsided only with heavy bloodshed. सारी की सारी movements violent होती थी. क्योंकि obviously अब यहाँ पे बैठ के कोई dialogue करने वाला तो है नहीं. तीर कमान चलाने, भाले चलाने, ये हो. The other characteristic feature of the tribal is local character of the movement. Many of them started and persisted locally. तो एक particular जंगल में या एक particular area में ही localized movements हैं, nationalized movements नहीं. Another distinguishing character of the tribal movement is lack of leadership and inability of the Adivasis to coordinate among themselves to march ahead towards their goals strategically. So lacked leadership and coordination. एक बार पॉइंट समराइज करके साइड में लिख लोगे तो आपके लिए आसानी रहेगी याद करते टाइम यूपीएससी में. Then tribal movements used only traditional arms such as bows, arrows, and axes. So like in Britishers के पास तो modern weapons थे. So traditional weapons. Guerrilla warfare tactics and traditional weapons. In post-independent India, Naxalite movement used modern weapons, though most other tribal movements still relied on traditional arms. Naxalites को तो चाइना ने सप्लाई किया बहुत बड़े modern weapons. So these are the basic characteristics and nature of the tribal movement. Okay. What is the classification? आमतौर पे हम ये देख लेते हैं कि मेनलैंड एंड नॉर्थ ईस्ट दो तरह से क्लासिफाई कर लेते हैं. Okay. So one of the most cited classification of tribal movement is given by Mahapatra in 1972. He divided the tribal movements into reactionary, conservative, revisionary, or revolutionary. The reactionary movements aimed to bring back the good old days, whereas the conservative movements tried to maintain status quo. The revolutionary movements attempt to transform the society by purification or improvement of culture by eliminating evil or low customs or beliefs in institutions. Another way to categorize tribal movements is to study them as ethnic rebellion, reform movements, movements for political autonomy, secessionist movements, and agrarian interests. ये 1968 में सिन्हा ने एक डिवीजन दिया था. So हमारी हिसाब से देखने का तरीका क्या है? प्री इंडिपेंडेंस, पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस, दो तरह से हम देख सकते हैं. सो प्री इंडिपेंडेंस मूवमेंट का देखा जाए तो सबसे पहले एक संथल रिबेलियन आता है. हर रिबेलियन के अंदर आपको 3-4 चीजें पता करनी है. एरिया, लीडर, कॉज, इफेक्ट. बस ये 4 चीजों के ऊपर काम करें. कहाँ पे था, लीडर कौन था अगर था तो कोई, कॉज क्या है, इफेक्ट क्या है. So they fought against the Zamindars, Mahajans and the East India Company during 1855-56 in the erstwhile Bengal presidency. Clear हो गया? ठीक है. They lived in the region called Damine Ko, which was first cleared from jungle by them. Thus, they considered themselves as rightful occupants of the area. Jungle was needed to be cleared and converted into agricultural land to overcome the shortage of food due to famine. The Santals were invited to clear the jungle and made it suitable for cultivation. But once the jungle was cleared, local zamindars started collecting huge rent from the Santals for this land. Local traders and moneylenders too started exploiting them on many grounds. Cash payments करनी होती थी जमींदारी की. This was the seed of discontent among the Santals, and they had no security in the possession of the land they themselves had cleared out of the jungle. For the payment of rent, they depended upon the Mahajans, moneylenders, who in turn exploited the Adivasis in various ways in terms of interest and so on. So that's how it started. Okay. Now, they wanted to drive away the Dikus and establish Santhal Raj. Two tribal leaders, Kannu and Sidhu, ये दो major leaders हैं, led the Santhal rebellion against the Dikus, and they basically decided to just take back their land from the Zamindars and Mahajans. So British government basically supported paperwork. क्योंकि जमींदार और महाजन के पास पेपर ट्रायल अच्छा होता था तो उसकी साइड लेते थे. So they were obstructed by the police and they were violent rebellion for around 60 days. 160 Santals were massacred and the revolt was suppressed by heavy force. The British government realized the woes of Santals and around 5,000 square mile area was demarcated for Santals, which are later known as Santal Parganas. So that is how Santal rebellion ultimately had a good effect in terms of securing at least their land rights. Okay. तो इस तरह से अब ये सारी मूवमेंट्स हैं, आपने प्रीलिम्स के एंगल से सारी पढ़ रखी. सबके अंदर एक कॉमनैलिटी तो ये आएगी कि जमींदार, महाजन, डिक्कूस को बाहर निकालना है. तो वो ज्यादा टेंशन लेने की जरूरत नहीं है. आपको सिर्फ एरिया, लीडर, कॉज, इफेक्ट, ठीक है, उस एंगल से इन मूवमेंट्स को एक बार देखना है. इनका ज्यादातर क्वेश्चन जो रहेगा वो यही रहेगा कि आप इसमें कॉजेस क्या थी. वो पर्टिकुलर मूवमेंट्स नहीं आपसे पूछेंगे. प्रीलिम्स में पर्टिकुलर मूवमेंट्स पूछते हैं, मेंस के अंदर पर्टिकुलर मूवमेंट्स नहीं पूछते. ठीक है. और इनमें से आपको सिर्फ प्री इंडिपेंडेंस वाली चाहिए हिस्ट्री के अंदर, पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस वाली इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी के अंदर आती तो वहां कवर करेंगे. Now, impact of tribal movements. Now, tribal movements have a significant influence. Yes, please. Anybody?
Sorry, sir. Yes, sir. I just tried to consolidate these movements earlier. I've sent a PDF to you in case you think that is something that you would want to share. I'd made I'd written all of those down in a tabular form, all of these.
This one.
So the last page would be the tribal revolts. So these are other revolts.
I'll share it across in your group, no problem. But the concern is मेंस के लिए ना ये वाला टेबल बहुत है, बस आपको पूछेंगे लेकिन टेबल में ये वाली इंफॉर्मेशन कुछ नहीं पूछेंगे. फोकस उनका यही रहेगा कि इनका इम्पैक्ट क्या था, इनके कॉजेस क्या थे, इनका नेचर क्या था. ये वाली इंफॉर्मेशन बहुत अच्छी है, ये प्रीलिम्स में पूछते हैं. यूपीएससी इज वेरी क्लियर ऑन दिस. वो इश्यूज आज की डेट में उनका क्या रेलेवेंस है, इस तरह से क्वेश्चंस पूछेंगे आपसे. ठीक है, तो इसलिए मैं सिर्फ इम्पैक्ट पे और कॉजेस पे ज्यादा फोकस कर रहा हूँ. So tribal movements have significant influence on various aspects of Adivasi life even today. While discussing various movements in previous section, we have looked at their course and consequences. So let's see. The most obvious impact of the tribal movements have been on the economy of Adivasis. The economic oppression, while remained the core of almost all tribal movements, and was addressed to some extent by the British government. Certain policy measures were taken to reduce the Adivasis' dependence upon moneylenders and landlords. In some cases, land was also provided, for example, Santals got the Santal Parganas. However, core reason of discontent, that is the state's right on forest land, continued to exist and still continues to exist. The systematic exclusion of rights of the Adivasis on forest land became an important factor in continuing the discontent among the tribal leaders and movements such as Naxalbari movement in post-independent India. The impact of tribal movement is also observed in self-determination of Adivasis. The post-independent India initiated various welfare measures for the Adivasis, which were reflected in the increasing level of literacy and education. Strong Adivasi middle class and elite sections emerged in increasing tendency to assert tribal identity and resist disparities in development. Because of reservation, positive discrimination, and various government schemes, this has been possible. Adivasi consciousness witnessed regional expression and culminated in the formation of states like Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, a predominantly tribal states. Today, Adivasi of India have achieved significant political strength as a result of various tribal movements. So this is another impact. There has been tremendous impact of tribal movements on socio-cultural aspects of Adivasis. Various charismatic tribal leaders spearheaded movements which are reformative. Evil and harmful cultural practices were discarded and new beneficial cultural values were incorporated. For example, the Birasite or Bisayat movement, which you studied in the previous unit, is a crucial example. The tribal movements are also responsible for creating a consciousness based on Adivasi identity, which resulted in a new social solidarity among the Adivasis of India. Impact in recent times is very crucial from an environmental point of view. The anti-displacement movement are often pro-environmental, dam banane ke liye, for example, या mining करने के लिए. The tribal movements against mega projects and industries in ecologically sensitive area, for example, Western Ghats or Northeast, such as forest and hill regions, have stopped further deforestation and concretization of Earth's surface. The movement has also led to the recognition of indigenous knowledge. जैसे हमारा पूरा आयुष का जो वर्कआउट चल रहा है वो इसी के साथ रिलेटेड है. Regarding management of natural resources as well as Adivasi rights on forest land and resources. So essentially, अगर मैं इस सारे कंक्लूजन को वर्कआउट में लेके आऊं तो एक तो इसने राइट्स के ऊपर काम किया, इसके राइट्स आदिवासी राइट्स, ठीक है. दूसरा, इसने वैल्यूज के ऊपर काम किया. तीसरा, आइडेंटिटी के ऊपर काम किया, ठीक है. और चौथा, सॉलिडारिटी. पांचवा, इन्वायरमेंट. 5 बेसिक एस्पेक्ट्स हैं जिनके ऊपर इम्पैक्ट होता है आदिवासी मूवमेंट्स का या ट्राइबल मूवमेंट्स का इंडिया में आज की डेट में. तो यूपीएससी यहाँ पे फोकस रहता है. What is the impact of tribal movements of the pre-independent India on India's present political system और present socio-economic system? इस तरह से क्वेश्चन आएगा घुमा फिरा के, तो उनमें यही बातें करनी है 4-5, ठीक है. तो ये सीधा क्वेश्चन बनता है आपके पास. ओके, तो Question for practice. What is the impact of tribal movements on socio-economic setup of present day India? Okay. So you have to showcase the impact on various dimensions or levels: rights, values, identity, solidarity, environment. Okay. तो इसमें इतना ही है. फिर peasant movements में चलता है. अब पेजेंट्री का मेन कंसर्न क्या था? लैंड रेवेन्यू से ये भी परेशान है, जमींदारी, महलवाड़ी, रेतवाड़ी एंड सो ऑन. सो दूसरा, अब पेजेंट और पेजेंट मूवमेंट को कंसेप्चुलाइज करने के लिए दो तीन चीजें समझनी है जो आपके सोशल इश्यूज के साथ भी जुड़ा है. फॉर एग्जांपल, पेजेंट एंड कास्ट इंटरफेस इन इंडिया, पेजेंट मूवमेंट्स इन इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट. ठीक. फिर उसके बाद ये सारी मूवमेंट्स हैं, इसमें संथल रिबेलियन पेजेंट मूवमेंट के तौर पे भी आ रहा है क्योंकि वहां पे किसानी करना चाहते थे संथल ट्राइब्स. So social movements are social processes and are parts of social progression. These are broadly considered as sustained, organized, or collective efforts aiming to changes in thought, belief, value, attitudes, relationships, and major institutions in society, or to resist any change in societal arrangement. तो भी सोशल मूवमेंट की बहुत बढ़िया डेफिनेशन है, सीधा मीन्स में यूज कर सकते हो, कहीं पे भी कोई भी मूवमेंट आ जाए. ठीक है. They emerge as manifestation of collective discontent against existing social, economic, or political arrangements. Though the collective action vary with time and space, the important components such as ideology, organization, objective, and leadership play a role in varying degree in any social movement. This is a very good introduction to any question on social movement that you can use, or even you can use that in conclusion. Okay. Now, agrarian movements in India, जो आजकल भी चल रही, किसान आंदोलन, can be broadly classified into two main categories. First category includes the movement related to poor, small, and marginal agriculturalists, whose economic conditions and survival is mainly attached to agriculture and are termed as peasant movements. Second category includes those who are more affluent agriculturalists who can produce sufficient surplus from the agriculture. तो एक तो है large farmer, एक है small, इस तरह से देख सकते हैं. Now, who is a peasant? So social scientists have broadly underlined the subordinated, marginalized, and underdog position of the peasantry in human society. It's not just in India, everywhere it has been like this. Historically, peasants have always borne the burden of extreme forms of subordination and oppression in the society, whether it is feudalism, whether it is agricultural economics. Even today in India, it is the same. However, the specific socioeconomic conditions of their existence have largely shaped the role of peasantry in social change and transformation. In India, the term peasant is ambiguous and used differently by different authors or variously by the same authors in different studies. On the one hand, it is used for those agriculturalists who are homogeneous with small holdings operated mainly by family labor. And on the other hand, it includes all those who depend upon land, including the landless labor, as well as the supervisory agriculturalists. तो peasant के लिए आमतौर पे खेती बाड़ी से जुड़ा हुआ कोई ना कोई कंडे के हिसाब से बात करते हैं. इसके लिए लोकलाइज वोकैबुलरी क्या है? किसान, रोयतू, चाशी, and so on. Fine. Now, these terms signify specific cultural connotations to indicate the marginalized and inferior status of peasantry in society. Thus, peasants are socially and economically marginalized, culturally subjugated, politically disempowered social groups who are attached to land to eke out a subsistence living. ये आप सीधी सीधी मेंस में यूज कर सकते हो भाषा, चाहे कंक्लूजन लिख रहे हो चाहे इंट्रोडक्शन लिख रहे हो. Peasants movements in Indian context. Come forward. The impoverishment of Indian peasantry was a result of transformation of the agrarian structure during the colonial period due to colonial economic policies, ruin of the handicraft that led to overcrowding of land. Basically, जो artisans हैं, handicraftsmen हैं, वो भी agriculture पे depend करना शुरू कर दिया. New kinds of land revenue systems, colonial administrative and judicial system. इस वजह से impoverishment of peasantry आता है. Okay. अब इसके लिए movement क्या चला? So peasant movements can be broadly categorized into radical or reformative, depending upon their particular combination with ideology, form of mass mobilization, and orientation towards change. Radical movements are those that use non-institutional mass mobilization guided by an ideology of rapid change in social structure. They are short-lived. They may be spread over a large geographical area. So this is a radical movement. Reformative movement. So they use institutionalized mass mobilization. Radical से अलग है. Is guided by the ideology of gradual social change. एकदम से transformation नहीं आएगा. And tends to exhibit a longer lifespan. So peasant movements, however, are not discretely radical or reformative. Rather, one may be an extension of the another over a period of time. कभी radical होके फिर बाद में reformative हो जाती है, कभी reformative से radical में shift होती रहती है, based upon the anger in the situation and kind of emotions in the situation. How have been they evolving in India? So in the initial phase, that is 1857 to 1921, characterized by sporadic growth of peasant movements in the absence of proper leadership. कहीं पे थोड़ा बहुत movement हुआ, जो local जमींदार है, local money lender है, उसके against हथियार उठाए गए, उनको बाहर निकाला गया गांव से, बस फिर खत्म हो गए. Nothing much to be achieved. इस तरह के movements आपने देखे हैं, चंपारण सत्याग्रह, खेड़ा सत्याग्रह, ये सब ऐसे ही थे. ये स्मॉल लेवल पे पेजेंट मूवमेंट्स थे. गांधी ने भी उनको सपोर्ट किया. 1921 के बाद, दैट इज नॉन कॉर्पोरेशन मूवमेंट के बाद, so this is marked by the emergence of class conscious peasant organization, All India Kisan Sabha, for example. Post independence, this era witnessed the uninterrupted continuity of the agrarian movement due to the failure of ruling party to resolve any basic problem of the working masses of rural India. अब तो ऑल इंडिया किसान सभा हर जगह है और कंटिन्यूड मूवमेंट उनकी चलती रहती है, कुछ ना कुछ मुद्दों पे कुछ ना कुछ काम चलता रहेगा. जब ज्यादा परेशान गवर्नमेंट करती है तो फिर ज्यादा एग्रीवेटेड हो जाता है, नहीं तो चलता ही रहता है. कभी शुगर केन को लेके धरना ले रहे हैं, कभी एमएसपी को लेके. इट इज अ कंटिन्यूस प्रोसेस. ऐसा कोई एक साल नहीं जाता आफ्टर इंडिपेंडेंस जब मूवमेंट ना हुई किसानों की. हाँ, वो सरकार क्या है कि थोड़े बहुत वादे करके थोड़े बहुत शांत कर देते हैं उनको कुछ देर के लिए, और क्योंकि स्टेट गवर्नमेंट से इनका ज्यादातर वर्कआउट होता है, शुगर मिल्स के साथ ज्यादातर वर्कआउट होता है, प्राइवेट कॉर्पोरेट्स के साथ होता है, तो वो जल्दी सेटल कर लेगा. नेशनल गवर्नमेंट से तो सिर्फ 2020 में पाला पड़ा था, जिसको लेके मैंने कल भी एक वीडियो शेयर किया था यूट्यूब के अंदर. आपने देखा होगा, मैंने लिंक आपके ग्रुप में डाला है. तो उसमें वो पुराने फार्म लॉज डिस्कस्ड है, अगर आप देखना चाहें तो देख सकते हैं उसको. ठीक है, तो इसलिए वो ज्यादा विजिबल हो गया. ओके, तो इनिशियल फेज में किस तरह की मूवमेंट्स थी? So during this phase, the main reason of the series of spontaneous peasant uprising in different parts of the country was high-handedness of zamindars or landlords, along with excessive rates of land revenue. बस मेन कारण इतना ही था. तो इसलिए मूवमेंट भी इन्हीं के अगेंस्ट होता था. ये कब ज्यादा होते? When there were famines or economic depression. जैसे इंडिया में मॉनसून ठीक से नहीं आया, फसल ठीक से पैदावार नहीं हुई, कोई पर्टिकुलर प्रॉब्लम आ गई, तो ये ज्यादा होते हैं. Champaran and Kheda were prominent movements led by Indian National Congress under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi in this phase. ये दो यहाँ पे आते. मुपला रिबेलियन भी है, वो नॉन कॉर्पोरेशन मूवमेंट पे जो मुपला मुस्लिम्स हैं केरला के अंदर, उनके द्वारा चलाया गया. Then the second phase. So in this phase, it is initiated by the Indian National Congress in 1917-18, were restricted to seeking relief against excessive rates of land revenue and were in no case directed against जमींदार. अब वो गवर्नमेंट के साथ कंसर्न है, क्योंकि जमींदार भी तो गवर्नमेंट के कहने पे काम कर रहा है. ये वाली समझ धीरे धीरे है. The Congress policy of safeguarding the interest of zamindars and landlords led to the emergence of independent class organizations of Kisans in rural India, Consequently, Kisan organizations came into existence in different parts of the country. क्योंकि जमींदार और लैंडलॉर्ड्स ही वो बंदे थे जो कांग्रेस के लिए भी फंड्स मोबिलाइज कर सकते थे. सोचने वाली बात. तो पेजेंट्स को उनके खिलाफ भड़का के क्या ही फायदा है. ये समझा के फायदा है यार कि ये भी बंधे हुए हैं, आपको अगर लड़ाई करनी है तो ब्रिटिश सरकार के खिलाफ कीजिए. तो ये वाला पॉलिटिकल ओपिनियन की मोबिलाइजेशन करने वाली कांग्रेस. So Kisan Sabha movement started in Bihar under the leadership of Swami Sahajananda Saraswati, who had formed the Bihar Provincial Kisan Sabha in 1929. यहाँ से शुरू होता है. Gradually, the peasant movement intensified and spread across India. In Andhra Pradesh, it launched anti-settlement agitation against Zamindari Zulm in 1927. Also, a powerful struggle was initiated against the oppressive forest laws in South India in 1927. Similar movements were led in UP and other parts of India against tyranny of zamindars. Baswa Raja, for example, in 2015 talks about this. Baswa Raja is the author. Okay. All these radical developments on the peasants' front culminated in the formation of All India Kisan Sabha at the Lucknow session of the Indian National Congress in April 1936 with Swami Sahajananda Saraswati as the first president. क्योंकि बिहार में सबसे पहले इन्होंने मूवमेंट शुरू किया था, तो जब ऑल इंडिया मूवमेंट बनाया गया तो फिर से इनको हेड करने के लिए कहा गया. Communists were a major force that mobilized the peasantry. Communist Party of India started serious engagement with peasantry after the formation of All India Kisan Sabha. पंजाब में ना आज भी जो किसान हैं वो कम्युनिस्ट हैं ज्यादातर. ठीक है, उनकी जो ज्यादा allegiance है that is towards communist. The Communist Party of India increased its membership in the Peasant Front and set the stage for the most revolutionary struggle in the countryside. The CPI adopted itself to work at the grassroots level and in the countryside through the Kisan Sabhas, which initially was not a class-based organization and rich farmers were well represented in it. So All India Kisan Sabha में गरीब अमीर दोनों तरह के किसान. 1941 to 43, the All India Kisan Sabha passed into the hands of CPI, which under Swami Sahajananda tried to build Kisan Sabha as an organization of the rural poor, thus alienating the rich and the middle farmers. तो ज्यादातर गरीब किसानों की संस्था बन के रह गई ऑल इंडिया किसान सभा, क्योंकि इसी तरह से कम्युनिस्ट काम करते थे. वो मासेस में जाना था और मासेस ज्यादातर गरीब किसान थे. 1944-45, CPI had a complete control over the Kisan Sabha. Thus, Kisan Sabha became an organization of the poor peasants, tenants, sharecroppers, and landless agricultural laborers. It is this base that it could launch and lead agrarian struggles in the pre-independence period. The Tebhaga Movement in Bengal, the Telangana Movement, 1946 to 51, in the former Hyderabad state, was led by the communists. दो मेजर मूवमेंट्स इन्होंने वर्कआउट किया पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस कैसा रहा. In independent India, it has been the left parties, again the communist, they are called left parties, who have been the main organization or organizers for the peasantry. Initially, CPI hoped that Congress government would bring about radical programs to alter the landholding pattern in the countryside. Since the established communists accepted the parliamentary form of struggle, independent India has not witnessed any major armed uprising in the countryside till Naxalbari Revolt in 1967. The land reforms and community programs meant for promoting capitalist farming in India have only intensified the agrarian crisis. The post-independence intensification hota hai. Government has not only failed in providing relief to the vast bulk of direct deficit farmers and agricultural proletariat, that means common folk, its agrarian policy has also aggravated their miseries. This resulted in discontent in the agrarian society even after independence and led to a series of peasantry struggles in different parts of the country. See, right now, what do you think is the average monthly income of a farming household? It is around 8,000 rupees per month. This is the average monthly income. This is something which is equal to my 1 month electricity bill at my home, is this much. ठीक है, अगर मैं भी आजकल खेती कर रहा होता तो शायद मैं सिर्फ बिजली का बिल भरता. The school fee of my child is 6,200 rupees per month. How would I be able to afford this? And this is like an average school. It's not like a high-end school. High-end school in Chandigarh is a strawberry fields, तो उधर 15,000 है. और अगर मैं मुंबई में कहीं रहता होता तो उधर 50,000 से शुरू होती है. ठीक है, तो कैसे, हाउ वुड द किसान सर्वाइव? फिर उसके पास तो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल की ऑप्शन है, बिजली तो वो खपत कर ही नहीं सकता है ना. अगर ये यहाँ पे वो एसी चला के सो गया तो काम होगा उसका, खाना नहीं खा पाएगा. तो हाउ डू यू एक्सपेक्ट द किसान टू सर्वाइव? फिर ऐसे लोगों को भड़काना बहुत आसान, क्योंकि ये बिल्कुल हैंड टू माउथ एग्जिस्टेंस में रह रहे हैं. इनसे तो जो डेली लेबरर है वो ज्यादा पैसे कमा लेता है. उसकी 700 रुपया दिहाड़ी चल रही है आजकल, मल्टीप्लाइड बाय 30, तो कम से कम 20-21 हजार रुपए की उसकी प्रोबेबिलिटी है. अगर उसको 30 दिन काम नहीं मिलता, सिर्फ 15 दिन काम मिलता है, तो भी वो ज्यादा कमा लेगा. ठीक बात है ना. एक दिन काम पे जा रहा है, एक दिन रेस्ट कर रहा है, तो भी ज्यादा कमा लेता है किसान से. और किसान आजकल डेली लेबरर बनने पे मजबूर है. ज्यादातर आपको डेली वेजर्स में किसान ही मिलेंगे. वो अपनी फसल वहां पे सोइंग करके डेली वेजेस करने कंस्ट्रक्शन सेक्टर में चला जाता है. फिर वहां पे जब कटाई का टाइम आता है, फिर वापस अपने खेत में चला जाता है. फिर थोड़ी बहुत हार्वेस्ट होती है, उससे थोड़ा बहुत कुछ करके फिर कंस्ट्रक्शन लेबर में आ जाता है. ये हो रहा है, माइग्रेंट लेबर. ओके. Both the mainstream Communist Party and Communist Party of India, Marxist (CPIM), have formed peasant organizations like Kisan Sabha and the Organization of Agricultural Labours for mobilizing the concerned section. कुछ नहीं किया इन्होंने, लेबरर को यूज किया अपने वोट बैंक पॉलिटिक्स के लिए या अपना प्रोपेगेंडा चलाने के लिए. They have achieved limited success in Kerala, West Bengal, and Tripura, and in some other states. Similarly, CPI-ML, that is CPI Marxist Left Leninist, has formed its peasant front, that is Bihar Pradesh Kisan Sabha, which is now active in many of the districts of Bihar and Jharkhand. It is organizing the rural poor and also the middle peasants by taking up the issues which affect them. The non-parliamentary left, like the Marxist Coordination Committee, the People War Group, have been mobilizing rural people in states like Andhra, Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, and using violence as a strategy to address the questions of rural poor. So ये वही है नक्सलवादी. ठीक है, रेड कॉरिडोर इंडिया का पूरा है ईस्ट कोस्ट पे. The non-communist Praja Socialist Party was involved in several movements related to peasants in UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, and MP in the post-independence India up to 1960. Then there is Republication Party of India. This is also a non-Marxist party. Combined the cause of agrarian proletariat led the struggle at all India level. तो ऐसे बहुत सारी पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज आती रही. आपने इनमें से 2-3 एग्जांपल्स हैं. मेनली कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी ऑफ इंडिया. ठीक है, पंजाब का देख लेते हैं. इन पंजाब खेती बाड़ी जमींदारी यूनियन came into existence in 1972 that led 6 major struggles till 1980. अभी पंजाब किसान सभा है जो प्रेजेंटली 2020 में इन्वॉल्व है. ठीक है, तो इस तरह से पेजेंट मूवमेंट्स रही हैं. अब ये जो पेजेंट मूवमेंट्स है, इनका इम्पैक्ट क्या है, वहां जाना आपने, क्योंकि बेसिक्स तो आप पढ़ चुके हो. मोपिला, सो ऑल दैट रिबेलियन यू हैव वेंट थ्रू. इसमें कुछ एक्स्ट्रा है पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस, सो दैट्स ओके. चेंजिंग पैटर्न ऑफ एग्रीरियन स्ट्रक्चर एंड पेजेंट मूवमेंट्स इन दी कंटेम्पररी इंडिया. आजकल एग्रीरियन मूवमेंट्स कैसी? ओके, and agricultural labor in contemporary India in general is no longer attached to the same master as was the case during the colonial and pre-colonial period in the pre-capitalist agriculture. Due to the process of proletarian, proletarianization of agriculture, means छोटे-छोटे किसान है उसके अंदर. In the last few decades, there are more dependent on wage labor, like I told you, कि वो कभी खेती बाड़ी करता है, कभी daily wager बन जाता है, and thus losing extra economic relations with their employer, which govern the conditions of work and life. So this is what is happening. Since the Green Revolution, there is penetration of market economy and globalization, and peasant struggles also have undergone changes. New farmers organizations such as the Shitkari Sangathan in Maharashtra, Bharatiya Kisan Union in UP, Khedut Samaj in Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Punjab have come into existence that have a lot of political clout and influence. तो ये किसानों के लिए आज नॉर्मल चीज है, वोट बैंक उनको समझ आ गया. They demand remunerative prices for their produce, concessions, and subsidies in prices for agricultural inputs, electricity charges, irrigation charges, and betterment levies. They assert for a change in developmental paradigm from industrial development to agricultural development. With the rural-urban divide blurring in many places, rich peasants have begun to invest their agricultural surplus in industries and the urban sector also. इतने सारे फार्मर्स हैं जिनके पास 5-7 एकड़ जमीन थी तो रियल एस्टेट डेवलपर्स बन गए. पंजाब में तो ये बढ़िया स्कीम चल रही है. जिसके पास 6-8 एकड़ जमीन है वो बैंक से लोन उठाता है और अपनी एक रियल एस्टेट फ्लैट्स बनाने शुरू कर देता है, क्योंकि 5 एकड़ एक बेसिक मिनिमम रिक्वायरमेंट होती है सोसाइटी बनाने के लिए. वो उसमें लग गए. तो उसमें 5 एकड़ जमीन जो अदरवाइज शायद उसकी 35 लाख 40 लाख के हिसाब से पर एकड़ बिकनी थी और टोटल उसके पास 2 करोड़ की रेम्यूनरेशन आनी थी, अब उसमें वो एक फ्लैट 1 करोड़ रुपए का बेच लेता है और टावर बना देते हैं बढ़िया मजेदार. 10 मंजिला 12 मंजिला इमारत बन रही है, हर टावर में कम से कम एक फ्लोर पे 4 फ्लैट है ना. मजे ही मजे. तो ये चल रहा है आजकल. तो ये बात उनको समझ आ गई धीरे धीरे. तो बहुत सारे पंजाब में आप देखोगे किसानों के पास आजकल कौन सी गाड़ियां नहीं है ना. कभी वो कहीं जा रहे हैं, कभी कुछ हो रहा है. तो इट्स लाइक दिस. तो दैट्स व्हाट हैज लेफ्ट टू द लाइफस्टाइल चेंज. बट दे हैव लेफ्ट वन पर्टिकुलर थिंग, दैट इज किसानी, व्हिच इज अ ट्रबलिंग फैक्ट. अभी नहीं लग रहा ट्रबलिंग फैक्ट, क्योंकि कुछ किसान ही ऐसा कर पा रहे हैं और कुछ को ही समझ आ रहा है. लेकिन तब ट्रबलिंग फैक्ट लगेगा जब उनको लैंड पूलिंग मॉडल समझ आ गया. यार हमसे लोग खरीद के रियल एस्टेट चला रहे हैं, हम 4 किसान हैं, हम ही क्यों नहीं पार्टनर बन के बैंक से लोन ही उठाना है. बाकी तो अपने आप जनता पैसे डालती रहेगी जिन दिन को फ्लैट खरीदना होगा. ठीक है. एंड दे कैन डू वंडर्स इन दिस. इन हिमाचल पीपल हैव स्टार्टेड डूइंग वंडर्स इन दिस. देयर दिस हैज कम बिकॉज हिमाचल में ना कम्युनिटी ऑफ फार्मर्स बहुत स्ट्रांग है. पंजाब में कम्युनिटेरियन रिलेशनशिप्स फार्मर्स के अंदर थोड़े वीक हो गए. वीक क्या हो गया, एक दूसरे की टांग खींचने में लगे हो. तो वो जब थोड़ा सा स्ट्रांग बॉन्डिंग आ जाएगी दोबारा से, तो फिर ये हो सकता है. ठीक है. Post-economic reform period in India saw a number of peasant protests and movements against the acquisition of cultivable fertile land for industrial units and development projects. अब तो पंजाब के किसान तो इससे उल्टा चल रहा है. बोल रहे हाँ ले लो कोई बात नहीं, पैसे बताओ कितने दोगे, जमीन हम कहीं और खरीद लेंगे. इट्स लाइक दिस. A few examples are movements at Singur and Nandigram in West Bengal जब टाटा ने नैनो का प्लांट लगाने की कोशिश की थी 2006 में. Man in Maharashtra, Sampeta in Andhra Pradesh, and so on. In these movements, the support from several NGOs, wide publicity due to advancing IT sector is also seen. So that is how it has changed post-independence. Okay. So these are the peasant movements. इसके बाद worker movements हैं, working class movements in India. आमतौर पे working class have been also at the leading edge of India's freedom struggle. According to labor historians, the span of working class activities in India is divided into 4 distinct phases. First phase is 1850 to 1890, second 1890 to 1918, then 1980 to 1947, and then post-independence. अलग-अलग phases. तो basically ये differentiation क्यों है? 1890 के अंदर basic changes in British policy आते हैं. 1918 Government of India Act के साथ related है. 47 independence. That's it. So emergence and some aspects of the early contemporary working class. So modern Indian working class arose in consequence to development and growth of factory industry in India from the second half of the 19th century. 1853 में रेलवेज शुरू हुआ था, उसके साथ साथ ही बहुत सारी फैक्ट्री इंडस्ट्री इंडिया में शुरू हुआ. फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन. It is, however, about the turn of 20th century it took the shape of the working class. तब तक तो labor ही है, working class बाद में बनता धीरे धीरे. An exact estimate of the total population of the working class is difficult to arrive at, but N.M. Joshi, on the basis of 1931 census, calculated labor class or laboring class at 50 million, out of which roughly 10% were working in the organized industry. Okay. So far, as the major industries were concerned, the cotton textile industry in 1914 employed about 2.6 lakh workers. तो 2 लाख वर्कर करीब सारी इंडस्ट्रीज में, रेलवेज में सबसे ज्यादा 6 लाख. The number increased significantly after independence, and this was largely due to expansion of manufacturing industry as well as increasing population. Moreover, public sector utilities, corporation, government offices, इनकी वजह से भी industrial labor बढ़ता है. Okay. In recent years, owing to a number of reasons, the rate and increase in employment has gone down, and this has affected the employment potential and the condition of working of the working class. Now, what are the working class movements in pre-independence India? Let's see. First phase. So at this stage, the actions are sporadic, unorganized, and hence mostly ineffective. जैसे इलाहाबाद टेक्सटाइल मिल, वो एक मेजर इवेंट है इस टाइम पे जहां पे गांधी जी पार्टिसिपेट कर रहे हैं, एंड दैट इज इन 1918. ठीक है, सो दैट इज द ओनली वन दैट यू कैन एक्चुअली टॉक अबाउट. ओके, इलाहाबाद थी, अहमदाबाद थी, देखो जरा. हेलो हेलो, was it अहमदाबाद, was it इलाहाबाद टेक्सटाइल मिल स्ट्राइक, कौन सी थी? साक्षी, विनायक, शेरिल, किसको याद है?
Think Ahmedabad.
अहमदाबाद. Think. Why think? Be sure. So it was the Ahmedabad textile mill strike. तो अनुसुया बाई जो उनकी सिस्टर थी मिल ओनर की, उन्होंने गांधी जी को चिट्ठी लिखी कि आप आइए और वर्कर्स के साथ जरा बातचीत कीजिए. मेरे भाई साहब जो हैं वो इनको एक बोनस प्रॉमिस किया गया था जो देना था, लेकिन वो नहीं दे रहे हैं, तो उसके लिए वर्कआउट करना था. तो गांधी जी ने इस टाइम पे बोला कि सारे वर्कर स्ट्राइक पे जाएंगे, अनशन पे भी बैठेंगे. फिर उनकी आपस में कोऑर्डिनेशन हुआ तो वर्कर्स को अपना एक्स्ट्रा जो बोनस था वो मिला. सो दैट वाज द अहमदाबाद टेक्सटाइल मिल स्ट्राइक. सो 1918 का वो एक मेजर मूवमेंट है 1916-17 वाले फेज में, जो चंपारण, अहमदाबाद और खेड़ा, ये तीन इस तरह से चल. सो दैट इज द ओनली वन दैट इज इंपॉर्टेंट एट दिस पर्टिकुलर फेज जिसमें कुछ हुआ. बाकियों में स्पोरेडिक है, इधर उधर थोड़ा बहुत मूवमेंट चलता रहा. So nationalist historians often argue that organized working class movement in country was associated with the Indian national movement, but this is only partially correct. Several movements took place even before the Congress took serious note of the interest of the working class questions. In fact, moderate phase में तो interest of working class कहीं थे ही नहीं. वहां पे तो वो सिर्फ अपने लिए जो moderates थे कुछ positions in government चाहते. Though the Congress was formed in 1885, it seriously thought of organizing the working class only in the early 1920, that is non-cooperation movement. The working class in the country was organizing struggles against capital much before 1920. In the last decade of 19th century, Litton informs us there occurred strikes at Bombay, Kurla, Surat, Wardha, Ahmedabad, and so on. So these sub strikes. Okay. Then second phase. So this is associated with World War I. So working class struggle in the country entered into a different phase. The unorganized movement of workers took an organized form. Trade unions were formed on modern lines. सबसे पहले ये समझ आना शुरू. ये इंटरनेशनल लेबर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के बाद की बातें और रशियन रेवोल्यूशन के बाद की बात 1990. In several ways, the decade of 1920s is crucial in this regard. Firstly, in the 1920s, serious attempts were made by the Congress and the communists to mobilize the working class. And hence, from then onwards, national movement established a connection with the working class. इससे पहले वो इनसे अलग ही चल रहा. It was in 1920 that the first attempt was made to form an all India organization. Lokmanya Tilak, a congressman from the Bombay, was instrumental in the formation of All India Trade Union Congress with Chaman Lal and other office bearers of the organization. Thirdly, in this decade, India witnessed a large number of strikes. So, trade union का काम ही ये था, strikes, collective bargaining strength show करना है. Indian National Congress started thinking of mobilizing the working class from 1920s because now you needed people's revolution, mass movements, Gandhi के आने के बाद, तो इसलिए. Though some congressmen formed the AITUC in 1920, resolutions were passed in 20, 22, 24, and in 30 in the All India conferences. The clearest policy of Congress came only in 1936, when it appointed a committee to look after the labor matters. नेहरू के आने के बाद इनफैक्ट इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स में एक एक्टिव सीन पे जवाहरलाल नेहरू जब आते हैं तब जाके लेबर मैटर्स के ऊपर ढंग से कुछ काम होना शुरू हो रहा है, प्लानिंग के ऊपर कुछ काम होना शुरू हो रहा है. Okay? Thus, it was from the late 1930s that the Congress established deep links with the working class in the country. Congress, however, believed in the Gandhian strategy of class harmony. As a result, it did not lead to any radical working class agitations. In fact, two different strategies were to be found in operation. One was a radical one to be seen in industries owned by foreign capital, and a mild one if the industry is owned by Indian industrialists. इंडियन को तो बोलते थे क्योंकि इंडियन इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट फंडिंग करते थे और वो एक जो आत्मनिर्भर भारत की आज हम फिलॉसफी बात करते हैं, तो स्वदेशी मूवमेंट के भी हित में थे, इसीलिए इंडियन इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट आए थे अपने जगह पे, तो उनको सपोर्ट करते थे, उनके साथ माइल्ड रहते थे, चाहे बुरे हालात में से भी निकल रहे हो, लेकिन वेस्टर्न इंडस्ट्री को हमेशा रिपेल करते थे. कम फॉरवर्ड. So apart from the strikes in Bombay, there were strikes in jute mills in Calcutta, Eastern Railways. In the latter, the strike continued for 4 months. So alag-alag jagah pe basically strike was the weapon of the working class. That is what I basically want to tell you. Okay. Now, after a period of high activism, the working class in the 1920s, they were marked by a decline in the early 1930s, between 1930 and 34, which were in fact the years of Great Depression. 1928 से लेके 30 तक ग्रेट डिप्रेशन सरफेस करता और उसके बाद रिवाइव करने में टाइम लगता. To Chamanlal Revdi, it was a period of setback of the entire trade union movement, and that was due to the Meerut conspiracy case in which prominent communist leaders were arrested, and secondly, due to the successive splits that took place in the trade union congress earlier. तो अलग-अलग ट्रेड यूनियन कांग्रेस बन रही थी. ऑल इंडिया ट्रेड यूनियन कांग्रेस अलग रह गई, ऑल इंडिया रेड ट्रेड यूनियन कांग्रेस अलग हो गई, तो अलग-अलग लीडर्स के थ्रू अलग-अलग ट्रेड यूनियन कांग्रेस. दैट हैपेंड. The left-led unions that had become weaker in the early 90s but were able to reassert their influence by the year 1934. India, left matlab Communist Party. India was to witness a new strike wave, and the issue that precipitated in the strikes were the demand for restoration of wage cuts, wage increases, and the stopping of new forms of offensives against the labor. तो इस तरह की demands चल रही हैं, आगे चली. The movement entered into the decisive phase in 1940s, and this phase coincided with the final phase of the national movement and became part and parcel of the Quit India movement in 1942. On the industrial front, from 1939 onwards, working conditions of the workers were affected seriously, and there was an increase in working hours, multiple shift systems, क्योंकि Second World War चल रहा है 1939 to 45, और इंडिया एक सप्लायर है वर्ल्ड वॉर के लिए. Wages were significantly reduced, taxes were increased, workers on the whole were subjected to great hardships. As a result, strikes erupted throughout the country, and this is the time when nothing could be done. Government bhi kuch nahi kar raha hai. The demand was to increase the dearness allowance against rising prices and cost of living. That was one of the main demands at this point. Now, between 1945 and 47, after the end of the World War, the working class confronted two distinct problems. First was the problem of large-scale retrenchment, क्योंकि बहुत सारी British companies इंडिया से बाहर जा रही हैं, तो there will be retrenchment. Second, the problem of decline in earnings, क्योंकि salaries मिलेंगी. Movement since independence. Since independence कुछ खास movement नहीं हुई है labor class के अंदर. ज्यादातर बस वही 1940s 50s 60s जब सेटलमेंट पीरियड चल रहा है उसी टाइम पे थोड़ी बहुत मूवमेंट्स हैं. Okay. See, the communists dominated various labor organizations, whether it is Indian Federation of Labor or All India Trade Union Congress. M.N. Roy is the main architect of Indian Constitution also and main architect of labor movements post-independence also. ठीक है. So ये लोग हैं जो काम कर रहे हैं. अब इसमें चल क्या रहा है? The period between late 1960s to the imposition of emergency was a period of political turmoil and this significantly affected the shaped the working class movements in the country. Indira Gandhi started centralizing and concentrating power in her hands after the elections of 1971. तो इंदिरा गांधी वही कर रही थी जो अभी आजकल बांग्लादेश में चल रहा था. बस बांग्लादेशी पीएम को भागना पड़ा और उसको मरना पड़ा. ठीक है. तो दिस स्टार्ट्स हैपनिंग व्हेन यू स्टार्ट सेंट्रलाइजिंग पावर. Taking advantage of the capitalist class, resorted to new forms of offensives, lockouts being made due to large number of man days was lost. तो ये situation 1960 से लेके 70s तक चलती है क्योंकि 75 से लेके 77 तक तो इमरजेंसी और उसके बाद भी हालात ठीक नहीं होते जल्दी. So in the period between 1965 and 75, the number of work days lost due to strikes and lockouts increased by almost 500%. The strike was important because it was only strike that was able to challenge the might of the Indian state. क्योंकि छोटी-छोटी चीजों पे भी फिर प्रॉब्लम आनी शुरू होती थी. Whether it is petroleum refinery, तो वहां पे भी स्ट्राइक करेंगे तो कैसे चलेगा काम? Okay. So in the country as a whole, since the emergency, the working class had to face a number of offensives from the employers. अब तो खैर धीरे धीरे लॉ ही ऐसा हो गया कि हायर एंड फायर स्ट्रेटजी आ गई और नंबर ऑफ लेबर इंक्रीज कर गया. तो इसलिए रिट्रेंचमेंट से अब कोई ऐसी प्रॉब्लम्स नहीं होती प्राइवेट सेक्टर को. And since the late 1980s and 1990s, the working class is confronted with two different forms of offensive that it has not faced earlier. First problem that it faces is the growth of Hindutva-based political parties, namely BJP, Shiv Sena, and the consequent growth of labor organizations, that is Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh and Bharatiya Kamagar Sena. इन दोनों के respective labor organizations. That has in turn fragmented the working class among communal lines. पहले ये नहीं होता था. ठीक है. पहले working class is working class. Secondly, with the introduction of new economic policies since 1991, the consequent globalization of Indian economy, labor in the country has been facing the might of the capital in different forms. First problem is the divisive in nature since it has divided the working class in the country among communal lines, whereas the second development has affected the working class significantly and has thrown the challenge to the organized working class movement in the country. It's much more severe at this juncture, and it is to this we now turn. The new economic policy basically LPG के बाद क्या हुआ? So liberalization has meant reduction of government control over the private sector. As a result, bargaining position of the worker vis-a-vis the capital has declined. जितने भी acts हैं अभी वो pro employer हैं, इस तरह से चल रहा है. So as a result, the overall policy's likely problem will be there will be no statutory minimum wages for labor, no obstruction to retrenchment, giving the employers the complete right to hire and fire. तो ये दो प्रॉब्लम्स हैं इंडिया में. स्टैट्यूटरी मिनिमम वेजेस नहीं है किसी भी तरह की लेबर के लिए और रिट्रेंचमेंट पे कोई क्वेश्चन मार्क नहीं. Come to this. Trade unions in the country as a whole have not been responsive to the problems of the working class in the country. Unions lie fragmented from the factory to the national level, and that has produced bitter rivalry among the unions. And hence, very often they have failed to respond to the issues of the working class. So trade unions भी basically politically, communally अलग-अलग line पे divide हो चुकी हैं. To sum up, the movement of the organized workers in the country dates back to the period when industrialization started and the first working class in the country appeared. Till today, the movement is going on, but the problems are not solved. because we have left out two basic things, like I was talking about yesterday. We've allowed MNCs, but we've not allowed MNC culture in India to prevail. That is basic minimum wages in every sector based upon hourly rates, and second, the working conditions. So ये दो चीजें जो हैं वो नहीं हमने लेके आए, MNCs ले आए इंडिया। इसको ठीक करने की जरूरत है। पेजेंट मूवमेंट्स आप ऑलरेडी पढ़ चुके हैं, ये वही है। अब इस पे जरा क्वेश्चन आंसर्स देखिए। So there were some common characteristics of the tribal uprisings, even though they were separated from one another in time and space. तो दो तरह की tribal uprisings होती इंडिया में। Common reasons क्या हैं tribal uprisings के पीछे देखते हैं। तो mainland tribal revolt में land settlement या land revenue settlement is one of the major concern. फिर influx of the non-tribals into tribal areas. Shifting cultivation was curbed, तो forest use नहीं कर सकते। Exploitation by police, traders, moneylenders, outsiders, Dikus. Christian missionaries came to these regions and their effort interfered with the traditional customs of the tribals. They are mainland tribal revolts. Frontier tribal revolts, that is northeastern part of the country. So, इधर क्या चल रहा है? So these are not forest-based or agrarian revolts, and they are mostly in case of tribal identity. Okay. They continued for a longer time than non-frontier tribal movements. Desanskritization movement also spread among the frontier tribes. तो इनका ज्यादातर कंसर्न था ethnicity, ethnic purity, cultural mix-up. वो नहीं चाहते। What are the characteristics? So tribal identity and ethnic ties lay behind the solidarity. Then not all outsiders were seen as enemies against foreign government, and many uprisings were led by messiah-like figures. आज भी उनकी पूजा करते लोग। टेक्नोलॉजिकली बैकवर्ड, हमेशा वेपन्स इनके पास पुराने रहे। तो ये आपने स्टैंडर्ड अभी देख लिया, वही सब रीजंस हैं यहाँ पे। Discuss the reasons for Indigo Revolt and role of riots and intelligentsia in its success. तो अगर कोई स्पेसिफिक पे क्वेश्चन आ जाए तो कैसे वर्कआउट करना? तो पहले तो इंडिगो बताओ कि क्या है। नेचुरल डाई यूज होता था टेक्सटाइल में। ब्रिटिश प्लांटेशन वालों ने यहाँ पे 3 कठिया सिस्टम शुरू किया था, है ना? So features of indigo cultivation. So in Rayoti system of indigo plantation, the peasant was forced to cultivate indigo on 4 major parts of their field. The Rayots were made to enter a contract for compulsory indigo cultivation, which was then purchased at a rate much lower than market rate by the Britishers. Planters also acted hand in glove with the European magistrates, thinning the chances of any legal respite from fraudulent and exploitative contracts via legal means. The hesitant and dissenting peasants were subjected to various kinds of torture, extra legal force by the planters, till they gave in. Such conditions led to resistance of the indigo cultivators in Bengal in 1859 and led to the Indigo Revolt. So, Riots, उन्होंने क्या क्या किया? Asserted the rights not grow indigo under duress and resisted physical pressure of planters by their united and collective efforts. Peasants refused to take advance called dadon, which were offered at high interest rates by the planters to coerce the planters or peasants into contracts. कि एक बार इनको पैसे वैसे दे दो, बाद में बोलेंगे तुम्हारा इतना ब्याज पड़ा है, लाओ फ्री में देके जाओ इंडिगो। As the resistance spread, indigo factories were attacked and aggressive defense was organized to meet the challenge of use of force by the planters and the police. Riots also refused to pay rents to the zamindars and physically resisted the attempts to evict them. Joint funds were raised to fight court cases and also undertake legal action in courts. Tactics of social boycott was used to force planter servants and helpers to leave them. तो प्लांटर्स अपने आप चले जाएंगे, खुद तो काम करने की आदत है नहीं। इंटेलिजेंस है। So newspapers like the Hindu Patriot under Harish Chandra Mukherjee and reports of journalists like Sisir Kumar Ghosh publicized and defended the cause of peasantry while exposing the exploitation of indigo planters. Artists who publicized the plight of indigo cultivators. So for example, Deen Bandhu Mitra's play Neel Darpan, very famous, prelims में भी कई बार क्वेश्चन आ गया, attained great fame. Missionaries also reacted positively towards peasants' demands and raised their voice in support. So that's how they were able to drive away the plantations, indigo planters. And what was the significance of the Champaran movement in India's journey to freedom struggle? तो गांधी जी ने सपोर्ट किया था 1917 बिहार के अंदर, और ये भी इंडिगो प्लांटर्स की मूवमेंट है चंपारण. So European planters had been forcing peasants to grow indigo on 3/20th part of the total land, that is the Tinkatia system. Now significance क्या है? It is the first lesson in disobedience movement, civil disobedience, beginning of the mass movement era, emergence of mass leader that is Gandhi ji, and first demonstration of non-violent satyagrah. And ultimately they got the best of it. Discuss various peasant movements and their impact that took place during the Indian freedom struggle. तो ये peasant movements के ऊपर एक combined question आता है तो लिख सकते. So peasant revolts before the Gandhian phase, लिखने का तरीका तो इंडिगो, अबना और डेक्कन, ये तीन का एग्जांपल दे सकते हो, सबसे बढ़िया एग्जांपल्स हैं. Then during Gandhian phase, you got Champaran, Mopila, and others. Okay. Impact, awareness inspired others to revolt, and peasants' voices were heard because that led to certain right assertions. The government appointed an indigo commission to inquire into the problems of indigo cultivation, and based on its recommendation, government issued a notification in 1860 that ryots could not be compelled to grow indigo, and that it would ensure that all disputes were settled by legal means. The Deccan Agriculturalist Relief Act, passed in 1879, had a same purpose. Various Kisan Sabhas were formed to organize and agitate for peasant demands during non-cooperation movement. तो सबका गवर्नमेंट से भी रिस्पांस पॉजिटिव मिला. Growth of nationalism. The Champaran Agrarian Act was assented by the Governor General of India in 1918. Ideology of non-violence had given much strength to the peasants who participated in the movement, and the movement also contributed to the growth of nationalism. Then Champaran Satyagraha was the first intersection of peasant unrest and the national movement. Comment. यही जो nationalism की तरफ कैसे लेके जाता है, इसको थोड़ा और इसमें explore किए आंसर के अंदर. ठीक है, तो go through these questions and try and write them. ये वाला क्वेश्चन आप खुद प्रैक्टिस करो. Examine the major difference between the peasant movements of 19th and 20th century and their impact on society. Basically फर्क यहाँ पे प्री गांधीयन और पोस्ट गांधीयन का है. ठीक है, 20th सेंचुरी में गांधी जी हैं और उनकी वजह से पेजेंट मूवमेंट में एक ट्रांजिशन आता है. अब वो मास मूवमेंट है, बेटर ऑर्गेनाइज्ड है. There is, they are more all India. They got the leadership which they were earlier missing. तो ये basic differentiation. ठीक है. Then peasant movements in 20th century India were deeply influenced by the ongoing struggle of national freedom. तो basically उसमें national freedom की बात होती है. क्यों गांधी जी है ना, तो political leader के तौर पे वो काम कर रहे थे. तो चंपारण, खेड़ा, बरदौली, ये सब में इस तरह से वर्कआउट है. Then during non-cooperation movement भी मोपिला, किसान सभा, इक्का, yes, civil disobedience movement के टाइम पे भी. So they have been working like this through and through in the national movement. Quit India movement के टाइम पे तिभागा, abolition of जमींदारी. So इन सब के नाम याद रखने, पढ़ रखे हैं आपने प्रीलिम्स में. तो कौन-कौन सी नेशनल मूवमेंट के साथ कौन-कौन सी पेजेंट मूवमेंट चल रहे हैं, लाइक दिस. फाइन. मेंस में हम पढ़ते हैं ना, अलग अलग हो जाते हैं वहां पे, तो यहाँ पे कंबाइंड फॉर्मेट में एक जगह पढ़े जाएंगे. सो दिस इज इट फॉर पेजेंट मूवमेंट्स. अब हमारे कुछ स्पेसिफिक से क्वेश्चंस रह गए, एनसीएम, क्विट इंडिया मूवमेंट एंड सो ऑन. तो उनको आप एक बार रीडिंग कर लो. मंडे को हम उसको फाइनली वर्कड आउट कर देंगे. ट्यूसडे से विल स्टार्ट विद ज्योग्राफी. So that's it. Thank you. If you have any questions, please do ask.